Well, thank you for joining us this morning. It is my pleasure to have the opportunity to share with you this morning. If you've been around at all, you know that Jeff has had a lot on his plate with getting things moved. So I was honored that he asked me to cover for him. Before we get started, I'm just going to ask that the Lord would just bless this time as we dive into his word. So pray with me if you would, please. Father, I thank you for this church. I thank you for the opportunity to gather together, to fellowship with each other during the time of greeting, to worship you in song, and now to dig into your word, find the truths that are there. Lord, we are all coming from just different avenues in life. We have different stresses, different distractions, anxieties. Lord, this morning I would ask that you would steal our minds, Father, that you would allow us to focus, to learn, to gain spiritual nutrition from your word. I thank you for who you are, and I thank you for loving us in spite of who we can be, who we are sometimes. In Christ's name I pray. Amen. Well, for those of you who are not aware, I have been batching it for the last 10 days. My wife and children have gone down to Texas. They left with Louise to visit Holly's sister in Austin, Texas. And I have been alone for the last 10 days. And unfortunately, I have come to realize that I am not as domesticated as I thought I was. If I never eat another box of macaroni and cheese, I'll be okay with that. I am proud of myself. I did actually buy a gallon of milk in the last 10 days. However, when I went to get the milk, I forgot the toothpaste. And for the last 3 days, I have been using Emily's bubblegum glitter flavored toothpaste. I don't recommend it. I don't know how kids can enjoy that. But I want to thank you for joining us this morning as we continue on with the second session of a 3-part series regarding the fruit of the Spirit. And Paul, in Galatians chapter 5, verse 22, he gives a list of the 9 characteristics, or what we would call the fruit of the Spirit. And in going through and preparing for this, if you look closely, you'll see that there's 4 groups that are put together here. And we're going to walk through that and see how that works in our lives and how that can flesh out in our lives. And it's the fruit of the Spirit. And the first category is this. Go ahead and click, there you go, is love. It's God's grace fulfilling the whole of the law. This refers back to that ever familiar verse of John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. This is a sacrificial love. And Pastor Jeff shared with us this last week, love is initiated from God. And it all starts right there. The next group, which Pastor Jeff also shared with, is joy and peace. And this is a perspective that as believers, we can have. It sets us apart in our congregation. And even just this morning, we had a conversation about passing away. And how do we interact, or how do we engage that, and how do we respond to that? And it was shared with me that I don't know how the world can handle it. I don't know how the world makes it through those situations. And it's because we know, going back to God, it is God that gives us joy. It is because of the strength and the sovereignty that we see in God, we can have peace. And again, those are initiated by God, as Pastor Jeff had shared with us last week. The next of the group is classified as the graces. And this is how we relate to others. This is how we engage other people. It's patience, kindness, goodness, which is what I'll be covering this morning, and then faithfulness and meekness. And then the last of the group is more introspective. This deals with who we are as a person. This deals with how we manage ourselves, and how we keep that sin from flaring up, and how to have self-control. And next week, Pastor Jeff will kind of wrap that up and talk about the self-control and whatnot. But as I was going through and preparing this message, there was just a curious observation to me and this is kind of a little extra. I did put it in your notes, but walk through it with me. And you'll see that in these groups, there's a pattern that takes place. And it is a pattern for Christian living. I'm going to wait for my to catch up with me. There we go. It's a pattern of a Christian life. And if you look at the first two groups that we looked at, the focus is God. And the reason that the focus is God is because it is God who initiated the relationship. There is nothing that we could do of ourselves. There is nothing that we could pull from in ourselves to be able to make things right with God. It is Him who made the sacrifice. It is Him who said, "You will never be able to obtain what needs to take place. I am coming to you." And that's huge. And it is also because of God that we can have the joy and the peace. Again, it goes back to understanding and focusing that God is a big God, and He is a sovereign God, and He is a God of strength. And because of that, we can put our hope, our trust, our fears, our anxieties all on His shoulders, and to be able to look and say, I can have joy. I can have peace. That doesn't mean that there won't be sorrow. It doesn't mean that there won't be things that grip us to the core and possibly shake us and scare us and cause fear within us. But we can respond differently because of the hope that we have. It is possible to have that joy and that peace. The next thing on the list is others. This is how we respond, interact with, look on, and tend to others. And I'm going to get us started in this portion today. And this goes back to the example that God gave us. And now we are taking the next step. Our focus is still, the number one is God. The next focus in our life should be others. There should be an outpouring, a giving, a want to encourage, a means to come alongside others in our lives. That should be the next focus. And then finally, it comes down to ourselves. What should we be doing to steer our behavior? And that is the stair step of the pattern that a Christian should be following in life. Our number one focus is God. Our number two focus should be others. And then finally, we need to be focusing on ourselves. And I think that you'll find that when you spend so much time focusing on God, focusing on others, things in your personal life will fall into place much, much smoother. So that's just a little freebie, something that I had noticed as I was working through those couple verses and the fruit of the Spirit. And last week, Pastor Jeff shared with us love and joy and peace. And he shared with us, and I appreciated this, he shared with us that this fruit is not something that we have on our own. This is something that has got to come from the Spirit of God. And when we display that fruit, it is a demonstration of the Spirit of God alive in us. Again, it's nothing that we can muster on our own. So it's always interesting to keep that in mind. And as we've gone through the last couple weeks and talked about spiritual gifts and things like that, keeping in mind, apart from God, there is no good thing. The characteristics that we have in life that are good and positive and encouraging, those come from God. Just as those gifts are displayed, it's a demonstration of the Spirit through us. So it all starts with God. And this week, I have the opportunity to share with you, get started on the second group, and that is the Spirit-led graces, patience, kindness, goodness. And we're going to start with patience. My first thoughts of patience go back to being a kid. And like every other kid, couldn't tell you how many times Mom was like, will you be patient? Will you just be patient? And it didn't work because I'm an adult and I'm still not very patient. It's easy for me to sit at a stoplight and my hands digging into the steering wheel thinking, I got somewhere to be, can you hurry up? Come on, let's go. And one of the other things that I have still not adapted well to in country living is the dreaded tractor of slowness and frustration. It seems like every time I am running late, there's a big green machine in front of me. And I can't get around it, and I certainly ain't going to, it's just one of those things. I have to learn to adjust. I have to be patient with that. Now, don't get me wrong. I love farmers. You can tell by my waistline that I like to eat, so I don't begrudge them and what they do. I just need to learn to be patient. So that's a different type of patience than what we're going to deal with today. The patience that we're dealing with today is interpersonal. It's relating to one another. It's how we engage one another. And generally, I stick with the NIV. I don't have any issues with other translations of the Bible. When I became a believer, I was given an NIV Bible, and that's just kind of what I've stuck with. But whenever I prepare a message, I love getting different translations and different books and just kind of comparing words. And I got a buddy, Craig, who has been visiting with me on and off. And over the last couple of days, he'll come in and it's like, where do I sit? Because I've got stacks of books here and stacks of books there, and they're open. And sorry, Craig, that's just how I function. But love the idea of just comparing words. And quite often, I will find myself gravitating to the King James Version. I know that's a hard book to read, and some people pick it up and they struggle with it. But some of the words that are found there, they carry so much heft, I guess, is how I would say it. There's just oomph, and it's clear what is trying to be communicated. And for the first chunk that we're going to go through as far as patience, I went to the King James Version. And can somebody tell me what the King James Version of patience is? Anybody know what that is? Long-suffering. Long-suffering. Now, it can't get much clearer than that. Long-suffering. That implies there's going to be an extended period of time, and there will be suffering. I really don't have anything else to add. I mean, there it is. And I love how they do that. And you know what? I love how King James gives us that word of long-suffering. As believers, it is possible for us to be okay with that. How many of you guys believe that? As believers, it is okay. We can deal with long-suffering. And I want to share with you why. In Adam Clark's commentary, he says this in regard to long-suffering. Good job. long-mindedness, bearing with the frailties and the provocations of others from the consideration that God has borne long with ours. And that, if he had not, we would have been speedily consumed. Meaning that if we had to face the fury of God because of our downfalls, we would not be here. And on a day-to-day basis, God overlooks our faults and our frailties. And despite all of our deficiencies, and I guess more to the point, despite the deficiencies that we see in others, things that drive us crazy about other people, we have to keep in mind we do the same thing to God on a daily basis. There are things that we do that drive him batty, and yet he is patient with us. We need to be long-suffering with others. Clark then goes on to share this. It says, bearing up also through all the troubles and difficulties of life without murmuring and repining, submitting cheerfully to every dispensation of God's providence, and thus deriving benefit from every occurrence. First two words in his description, bear up, struck me. And it's not something that you hear very often. I don't know if it's an old English saying or what, but the first time that I had ever heard bear up was about 10 years ago. It was 6 o'clock, 6:30 in the morning, and I get the nudge, the gentle nudge from my wife. My water just broke. And I'm ready to go, or at least I thought I was ready to go. And I scoop her up, and I get her out to the car, and I run in, and I grab the luggage, and I throw that in the car, and I'm white-knuckling it all the way to Carson City. And we're living in Alma, and I'm getting somewhat safely, I'm getting us to Carson City Hospital. And we're in the labor room, and Holly is beginning to really, really feel the pain of the contractions. And as they're getting worse and worse, I don't even know where this lady came from. I don't know if she was like an angel or what, but this little lady, she comes in, and Holly's just, I could not do childbirth. I just couldn't. And this little lady, she comes up, and she ever so gently, she puts her hand on Holly's arm, and she says, bear up, honey. It'll be over soon, and it'll be worth it. And I just thought, wow, what about me? She's crushing my fingers. That's just how selfish I am. She's talking kind words to my wife, and I'm dying over here. But I want you to, as I give a couple examples, I want you to keep in mind, bear up, honey. It will be worth it. Just hold on to that. Keep that in your mind for a second. I want to give you a couple examples of patience and long-suffering. And I know that there are instances of this in our congregation today. I pray for you. I know that others pray for you. And I didn't mean to coincide if any of these strike a chord. No names or what's that disclaimer that they have on movies. This wasn't meant to imply or attend to anybody in the audience. But when I think of long-suffering, I always think of an adult child who has a parent who is failing in health, whether it be physically or mentally, and are just requiring constant attention. Just constant attention. And it's like the roles have been reversed, and the parent can no longer even handle the basics of life. And that child, or that adult child, has to be there and support them through that. And keeping in mind that they have an obligation before God to honor their father and mother. That is long-suffering. Long-suffering is the wife who is unequally yoked, who is in a marriage with a husband who is not a believer and fights daily to walk away, to say, I can't handle this anymore. But yet she wants to honor God in her relationship with her husband. It is a parent who has a child who is living a lifestyle that is not acceptable to God. And it is the parent who is praying daily, Lord, grab a hold of their heart, and to think of the hope of what that would be and the celebration that would come during that day. That is long-suffering. It's a father who has worked at the same job for 20 years, and it is physically demanding on his body, or maybe it is physically demanding mentally for him, and comes home exhausted, wishes maybe that something better would come down the pike, maybe he would get moved up the ladder, but he loves his family. And every morning when he wakes up, he thanks the Lord that he has a job that can meet the needs of those in his care. He's doing that for his family. That is long suffering. Goes back to that idea. Bear up, honey. It will be worth it. Bear up. I've got to be honest with you. I want to share with you some self-introspective as I prepared this message. This week, I've been in several youth pastor positions, and there have been ideals of, boy, I wonder what it would be like to be a lead pastor. But after preparing this message, I came to the conclusion on why I am not a lead pastor. In looking through and looking at patients, I have come to the full awareness that I have many, many, many failures in this area. And to be a lead pastor, you've got to be a patient person, because people come with all kinds of things. And I have been made full aware. And if I were a lead pastor, and if I had to put a message like this together every week, I would feel so overwhelmed and like such a hypocrite that I could never make it out of my office. So, Pastor Jeff, I'm glad that you're here, and I'm glad that you can do what you do. But with that said, I want to go back to what Pastor Jeff shared with us last week. The gifts of the Spirit is not something that we can muster up on our own. It is something that God allows the Spirit to indwell us and to shine through us. So for me and for you, all of us together, we need to keep that in mind. And who knows, maybe there is hope for me someday. It's going to take a lot, but the next on the list is kindness. And again, we're going to go back to the King James version of this. And kindness is translated as gentleness. And it comes from the King James, and it's just one of those words that you kind of have to wrap your mind around. Gentleness. What does gentleness mean? I'm hoping this morning that I can share with you what gentleness is. In his commentary on the New Testament, William Burkitt describes kindness as this. He says, it is a gentleness, an affability, a courtesy in conversation, a sweetness of temper, which renders us greatly useful, as well as exceedingly delightful to mankind. That's something that you don't hear people being classified as exceedingly delightful. Again, in our own abilities, we don't have the strength. We don't have the heart to be exceedingly delightful. Again, that goes back to what the Spirit can do in us. Albert Barnes shared this about gentleness, and it's a long quote, and I'm going to read through it, but there's good stuff in here. He says this: gentleness, the same word which is translated kindness in 2 Corinthians 6, verse 6, the word means goodness, kindness, and benevolence. It is opposed to a harsh, crabbed, crooked temper. It is a disposition to be pleased. It is mildness in temper, calmness in spirit, an unruffled disposition. A disposition to treat all with courtesy and politeness. This is one of the regular effects of the Spirit's operation on the heart. Religion makes no one crabbed and gloomy and sour. It sweetens the temper, corrects an irritable disposition, makes the heart kind, disposes us to make all around us as happy as possible. This is true politeness, a kind of politeness which can far better be learned in the school of Christ than that of Chesterfield, by the study of the New Testament than under the direction of the dancing master. There is a grace that comes along with those who have the spirit of gentleness. It's a unique gift, and it's not one that I've seen a lot. In fact, I've shared this story with you as individuals. I don't think I've shared it as a group. If I have, just indulge with me, nod your head, oh, that sounds new. Because surely somebody, it's got to be new. And I think that I've shared facets of this with you, but with a different focus. When I was a youth pastor in the Grand Rapids area, I had the opportunity to take a group of high schoolers on a missions trip to Tennessee. And it was amazing. It's great to get out of your element and to see what God can do. And once we were there, I was introduced to George. Not that George, but a George down in Tennessee, born and raised there. And he would be our team's coordinator for the week. And George was an older man, and he was tall. I'm fairly tall, but he was a tall man, and bald, had wide shoulders, and his face and his neck looked like weathered leather. I mean, this guy just had that look of, I was intimidated by George. But George would lead us from different work sites and help us plan out our VBS and would help us work with the locals. And as I observed George interacting both with myself and with others, it was very apparent to me that George displayed the gift of gentleness. We were in some rough areas down in Tennessee, and we met up with some rough folks. And there were a few times when I just kind of was checking out my surroundings and finding out which way to run if I needed to escape quickly. But George, he didn't have fear. And he was this gentle giant that would greet people. He would engage people. It did not matter if you were wearing a tux or if you were wearing tattered jeans and had tattoos all over. He didn't care. It didn't matter if you reeked. And I experienced some reeking of body odor in Tennessee. He didn't care if you reeked of body odor or if you reeked of Chanel number, whatever that perfume is. Yes, that. Thank you. He didn't care. He would gladly welcome you with open arms. And it was simply amazing to me. And throughout the week, there were several times when I found myself wanting to go hang out with George because there was something about this guy. He drew people to him. And it wasn't necessarily because he was really funny or charismatic, or he was just a big guy that was gentle. In every conversation that I witnessed, he was polite and he was genuine in his responses And just an amazing guy. And our last night there, we're meeting in chapel, and the speaker, he asks for all the leaders, the coordinators, to come down. And as the coordinators were coming down, they had a stack of towels over their shoulder, and they were carrying a bucket of hot water. And I thought, I'm about to be in for an experience. I don't know what this experience is, but I know that this is going to be an experience. And the speaker, he said, we have appreciated so much the impact that you have had on this community and your willingness to serve and to come down and to give so much that we want to say thank you. And the way that we would like to do that is by washing your feet. As he said that, I instantaneously began to process, I think this is out of my comfort zone. And I began to process, do I have to go up there? And all of these things are spinning ever so quickly in my head. And before I could even complete those thoughts, Anna Sjogren, senior in high school, itty-bitty girl, starts walking down the aisle, and she already has one shoe off. And there was a part of me that felt ashamed. And as she's walking down the aisle and she's taking her shoes off, she finds George, and she sits in a chair in front of George. And George is already there. And he's down on his hands and his knees, and he's got a bucket, and he has a towel. And he begins to wash Anna's feet. And as he's washing it, he looks at her in the eyes and says, thank you for serving the Lord this week. You were truly a blessing. And as soon as that was done, family, I began to cry. I began to weep. It was amazing to me, the gentleness. Anna, 100 pounds, soaking wet, if that, sitting in front of this gentle giant. And here he is, washing her feet and telling her how much he appreciates what she has done for the Lord. And I will take pride in this. I was not the only one that began to sob. And this was a full-out, give me a whole box of tissue sobbing that took place. And there was not a dry eye in the place. And I was just in awe of George and his gentleness and how he displayed that. See, George was somebody that he allowed the Spirit to shine through him both in word and in deed. And I'll be honest with you, I had never seen that before. I had never seen that type of gentleness. I've only seen it once since. Not the washing of the feet, but the gentleness, the love, the compassion, the want to engage someone and benefit them. It was amazing. And it's certainly something that I won't forget. The final thing, actually, you know what? Yeah, I did read that quote, sorry. The final thing on our list is goodness. And the Weymouth's New Testament translation translate the words of goodness to benevolence. And benevolence isn't a word that we hear a lot, so I threw up the synonym of that, which is compassion. And that ideal that there is the want to look for others, to look out for the best for others. And one last quote from Adam Clark is this. He says, goodness is the perpetual desire and sincere study not only to abstain from every appearance of evil, but to do good to the bodies and the souls of the men to the utmost of our abilities. But all this must spring from a good heart. And catch this, family, a heart purified by the Spirit of God. That's what can happen. That's the Spirit alive working in us. That is goodness and compassion. And every month here at Trinity, we serve communion. And that is a time when we gather together and we partake of the different elements. And after the communion, after we have acknowledged what has taken place on the cross, we do something called a deacon's offering. And that is when the deacons go through and there's a special offering, and I'm not sure if everybody knows why that's done, but I'm going to share with you because it is a fruit that takes place in our church. Other churches that I have been involved with as far as leadership and whatnot, we've always called it a benevolence offering. It was the ideal that we're going to take these monies and we're going to utilize them for the goodness of someone else. And I want to share with you a secret, one of the great mysteries of what takes place in a deacon's meeting. So hold on, and it's going to stay in the room, right? Every deacon's meeting, there's an allotted time where we sit down as a group of men, the leaders that God has placed in the church, and we take a look at our congregation and then our community, and we say, is there any needs? Is there someone who is hurting? Is there someone who has a need? Is there something that we as a church can provide? And we're very purposeful in that. I don't think I've ever been at a deacon's meeting where we haven't done that. It is just something that this church does very well as far as purposefully looking for opportunities to take care of those in our care. And that is the ideal of benevolence. And we don't fritter it away. There is wisdom on that deacon board. And we consider every situation, and we consider every need as it is brought forth. And we think, is this the best use? Because ultimately, we are stewards of that money. And we need to be wise in how we divvy that out. So know that it is something that we do with care. And if something comes up and the consideration has been there and we deem it necessary, then we act on it. And it is not something that we announce. It is not something that we share within a statement that says, hey, so-and-so had a need and we gave them this much money. Look at what a good church we are. That is not what we do, because that is not goodness. We do it privately, and we do it with consideration to that other person because we want to respect them and respect their reputation. We do it purposefully. That is goodness. That is goodness that Paul is talking about here. I'm very, very proud to say that this church does that well. And I thank you. And Paul goes on to say in Galatians, more so than in a church environment, but as individuals, we need to be looking for the opportunity to do good, to be a sense of goodness. And in my family, I have had the opportunity to, for whatever reason, God didn't make me rich, but he gave me a strong back and a willingness. And my family makes me look terrible when I compare myself to my wife and kids. But on occasion, God has allowed us to help other people out. And there's a great joy that comes from that. Not letting your right hand know what your left hand is doing and providing for someone in a time of need. And I'll be honest with you, there have been times when I have been on the receiving end of that. There have been times when there have been a brother or sister who has come alongside me and my family, and they have said, Jim, We want to help you. That is what family does. That is what family does. We take care of each other. And it can be very humbling. But when you understand the purpose and the reason and the why that it's being done, and if it is truly being done out of goodness, it turns out to be a win-win situation. Those who are in need benefit. Those who have provided, have performed the act of goodness, benefited. Am I saying that right? Benefited? Benefit? I don't know. Regardless, it's a win-win situation. And ultimately, God gets the glory. And it's awesome. And again, that's what family does. Now, I'm going to wrap up. But as I close, I want you to be mindful of a couple things. As you go throughout this next week and you consider what we've discussed this morning. First, I want you to be mindful of this in regard to patience. We need to be asking ourselves, are we allowing the Spirit to work through us in the area of forgiveness? Are we looking at those who have wronged us, who have cheated us, who have whatever it may be? Are we looking at them through the eyes of God and say, I forgive you? And then moving on, not getting bitter. The next thing I want you to be mindful is this. Yep, one more click. Sorry, that last bounce there. In regard to kindness, are you a delight to those around you? Are you like George? And I don't even know if George is around anymore. But that man exuded delight. And people were drawn to him. Not necessarily because he offered them anything other than encouragement and gentleness. And then the last thing to be mindful of this week is this. Goodness. Are you purposefully looking for opportunities to show compassion to others? Are you doing it with purpose? You know, it's easy for us to sit around and say, all right, I got this going on this week, I got this going on, I got this going on, I got this going on. Are you putting into your schedule a time to show goodness? Pastor Jeff is going to wrap us up next week in this series, and I'm going to ask that the worship team would come. I will pray as they do so. Father, I thank you for your word. I thank you for the instruction that we can find there. I thank you for loving us in spite of who we are. Lord, as we go throughout this next week, God, I ask that you would help us to be mindful. The world's looking at us. If we claim your name, they need to see something different. Lord, I just pray that you would just guide and direct. Be with us as we close. In Christ's name, amen.